Thank you, Mr. Roush, for your work and your report. The next item up is from Mr. Bonnett, our EUSD financial report. And if I could ask you to try to, can you do your presentation in about 20 minutes? Five? All right, even better.
Yeah, you could ask, you could just say, any questions?
Yeah. Well,
Is it possible to get the updated one that he mentioned that has the standard? Yes, it's not with him. But it's so much more work than what stays upstairs.
Once I get this up.
yeah, this is counts against your time, by the way.
Yeah, tough job.
So if you don't mind, I'll stand right here so I can push the buttons. This is based on our unaudited actuals that we recently presented at a previous school board meeting in September. And the first slide is just a graphical showing of our revenues. The big blue section is from revenue limit. And just to tell you, in fiscal year 13-14, the whole financing for schools has changed. So the revenue limit does not exist for schools anymore. We've gone to what is called the local control funding formula imposed by the state. So, but for last year, this reflects the revenue limit, which is our general purpose unrestricted funds that we use for most all operations of the school district. Then we have a small slice of federal revenues, other state revenues, and our other local revenues of about $3.7 million, which most of that comes from the local community via the parcel tax. And then a small sliver of transfers in. This is a graphical depiction of our expenditures. So the big blue section again is certificated salaries, and those are basically our teachers and our administrators. So that's all the employees that have to have a certificate to do the jobs that they're doing for the district. And then we have classified salaries, and then employee benefits that service both the certificated and the classified salaries. That includes CalSTRS for teacher retirement, CalPERS, classified retirement, workers' compensation, unemployment, Social Security, Medi-Cal, Medicare, and health and welfare benefits. Books and supplies, and then services, other operating expenses, basically PG&E, contracted services, and then a small sliver of transfers out.
What are the transfer in and transfer out? That's not inter-district transfer.
They are inter-fund transfers.
Yeah.
So we transfer dollars to our cafeteria fund, and we transfer dollars, a small amount, to help support our child development fund.
Yeah. So an inter-district transfer student would just come under the regular ADA that would be in
Through the revenue limit, yes. So in the past, we've made contributions from our unrestricted side of the house to our restricted, and those are basically our categorical programs, things that we receive money for prescribed programs, and so this last year, we reduced those contributions to some of those prescribed programs from $902,000 in 11-12 to 557,000 in 12-13. So that was a pretty significant savings for our general fund unrestricted portion. So some of the transfers out that we have to other funds, I mentioned Child Development Fund and our Child Nutrition Program. In the past, the contribution from the general fund to child nutrition was in excess of $300,000. So we changed the program. We have a company providing meals instead of cooking them in our kitchens, and so we greatly reduce our costs in that area.
Do you want questions as you go, or at
Sure.
the end I'll ask questions? Doesn't matter.
Sure, so you don't
Okay.
lose your question.
Great, thank you. Tell me what the child development, I realize it's a very small amount, but I'm not understanding what that fund represents.
That fund represents the contract that we have with the YMCA. The dollars flow through the district. We contract with YMCA to provide that service.
These are federal Head Start dollars.
But certainly it's more than $199 that flows through the district.
That's correct. That program operates about 145 to 154, depending on their enrollment, depending on the number of children.
150,000?
150,000.
Okay.
154,000 to 145,000, depending on the students that they serve.
And then in terms of child nutrition, you're saying you contracted the meals, which means that you reduced the staff costs,
We reduce staff costs, that's correct.
but that's not the total cost of the program, it's just the interfund transfer. It's a certain amount that isn't covered.
That's the amount that was coming from the general fund and going into our food service program fund or child nutrition fund, and that's Fund 130.
And the rest of the program would be funded by federal national school lunch dollars?
Federal and
And
state,
state.
and also local sales.
So what
Which
you're
would-
saying is that the federal money doesn't cover the actual costs of providing the food that you're providing to the students.
It doesn't cover the entire cost of the program.
Okay.
So, Mr. Bonnett, the $199 for child development, are you saying that's the amount transferred from the general fund to the child development program?
That's correct.
Okay. So in other words, even the contract for child development didn't pay for the child development program, the state contract?
That's right. This last year, we held them to that, or, well, with the exception of $199.
If they're only $200 off, I'll make up.
Right, yeah.
That's fine.
So this page is our multi-year projections. We had our 12-13 estimated actuals, and actually there are unaudited actuals now. And our ending fund balance total is $5,091,099. That top line is our revenues of $11 million, expenses of $9 million, and excess of revenues over expenses of $2.1 million. And then as you go across in that middle yellow line, you'll see what the projected, I'll call it income for lack of a better term right now, of $61,000, and then we start some deficit spending of $313,000 and $239,000. Now, I need to tell you, these are very conservative numbers, and after our first interim report, those numbers, in all likelihood, will go down considerably, and by the second interim, they may go down a little more. And I say that because in building the budget for 13-14, we're very conservative with our estimates of income, and we were, with the revised budget for 13-14, we're still unclear with some of the technical aspects of the new funding formula. So those still are changing at the state level. So some of those rules are changing currently, and we hope it gets a little better as we go down and the legislature makes its mind up on technical aspects of things like necessary small schools. The impact particular to Emeryville is that we became basic aid for 1 year in 12-13, and how LCFF impacts that for districts like ours in the current budget year.
Can you explain that a little bit more for people who don't understand what basic aid is, and a refresher?
Basic aid under the revenue limit formula is where districts receive tax money, local tax money, in excess of the state revenue limit, thus allowing the state not to pay districts, quote, a basic aid amount. In the past, that amount was about $120 per ADA, but with the deficits that we've had, the state hasn't been funding that amount. That's correct. The deficit the state has
State
had.
deficits, not school district deficits.
So in that revenue limit formula over the last few years, that deficit factor has been about 22% for school districts. So we were operating with 22% less dollars this last year in 11-12 and 12-13.
But part of the reason why the basic aid, we became basic aid, had to do with the dissolution of redevelopment.
That's correct. So
Speak to that a little bit. Yeah.
the county controller's office was holding redevelopment agency funds because the city was contesting, or the RDA was contesting a technical aspect of a tax increment as it applied to RDAs. Statewide, this impacted all districts statewide that had RDAs. Los Angeles Unified was greatly affected, and they had a lawsuit with regard to this with the state of California, which was recently resolved, which stated that those monies revert back to school districts. So we kind of hit a bonanza in 12-13 with regard to those RDA monies, which made us basic aid for 1 year.
It's a one-time bonanza.
It's a one-time.
Yes.
It's a
Settlement.
one-time impact on the school district's funds.
Is that why the 11.3 is significantly more than, for example, the 13-14 9.9 budget?
That's correct.
And that
Yes.
was enough to put you into basic aid?
That was enough to put us in the basic aid.
And now he's saying the status of basic aid under LCFF may reduce our somewhat, because they're assuming we're always going to be basic aid when we're not. We were just so
Right.
So we need the state to figure out how they're treating districts like us who skipped into basic aid for 1 year, but really are revenue limit districts.
So other districts that were basic aid for quite some time weren't imposed a 22% deficit factor on their revenue limit dollars. So states took dollars away from the state categorical funds that those districts received, and that impacts us because that happened to us in 12-13 for 1 year only. So that's an issue, that's one of those technical issues that's being resolved at the state level with regard to districts that were basic aid for 1 year.
So there are other districts, others besides EUSD, I'm sure, that had redevelopment money that was an influx for 1 year that this happened to? Do you kind of check in with those other districts in terms of the state's response, or is this a kind of you're on your own?
Kind of you're on your own. However, there's enough of us talking at the state level that people are listening. Joel Montero, who's the Chief Operating Officer for FICMAT, which is a statewide financial management crisis intervention team, something like that, is aware of it and has been discussing this in Sacramento with the Department of Finance.
I just have a quick question. What assumptions were used on the parcel tax as far as the projection looking forward?
Basically, just
Straight line or?
straight line
Okay.
for what we received this last year moving forward.
So for the next 2 years of a straight line?
Yes.
John, I have another question. Is this an issue that we should have the school district lobbyists up in Sacramento informed of and actively working on? Because we cannot leave it to the good offices of the state government. If our lobbyists aren't aware of it and aren't working on it, I would hope the school district would direct them to have a heads up on it.
I think that's a good idea as soon as we, this is just emerging in the last 30
Right.
days or so, so I think we want to get our facts straight before we arm our lobbyists.
But don't leave it to the state to help you out.
We're not just
Please.
leaving, we also happen to have a school board member who's very active in some of these activities at the state level, so I
We
think
could use some
we're
budget.
one of the
Yeah.
luckiest state school boards in the state, but I think your point's very well
Good.
taken. As soon as we have the right information, if we, looks like we're running into a roadblock, then we may also have to employ that.
Good.
approach.
And we have been in contact with Townsend Public Affairs, and they're watching it. Good, so.
So before you change to the next slide, if I may, I'm concerned about the projected 14-15 and 15-16 negative revenues minus expenditures numbers, and I just, I feel like I need to get an answer if that's doesn't look sustainable to me if those numbers, and I know you said they would be revised likely, but it just doesn't look like a balanced budget.
Well, they will, it isn't right now. But I'll tell you, my 13-14 numbers are wrong. And I say that because the LCFF numbers, those numbers are going to be changing until the state makes up, until they take care of all the technical problems with that. I've used, there's 3 spreadsheets that are out, at least that I've used for the LCFF calculation, and they're all 3 different numbers. So I use the most conservative one. So as we work through this, that's why I'm saying those numbers will go down as I get to the first interim reporting and the second interim.
And let me say this also, Member West. The school district has typically always deficit budgeted. But there's been very few years that I can remember since being involved with the district that we've ever actually deficit spend for actuals. So as Mr. Bonnett said, this is just a budget that he's put together based on some projections and assumptions. But like I said, in years, we've never deficit spend, typically.
And the funding for the LCFF ramps up as it goes further out into the next, I think, 7 or 8 years. So the increases are smaller in the beginning as opposed over the next 3 to 5 years. And the numbers in 15, 16 are more shaky. The further you go out and do projections, the more wrong they are.
So,
But they are our best guess at the time I put this together.
Plus, going back to the parcel tax, that was flat for those years going forward.
That's correct.
So we know we have more dollars coming in on the parcel tax, which is not reflected
That's
in that
correct.
number.
So I have to say, from the school board standpoint, we feel very, very lucky to have Mr. Bonnett as our CFO, and to be particularly in this time of change where the rules are changing, and our approach is always to project conservatively so that we're very aware of what we have to negotiate with the state. It keeps the fire under us because we do not want to make cuts. And so this gives us the reality to work with on the worst case, and then we negotiate to the best case. And I can say we've had no better negotiator than Mr. Benet representing us with the state.
Yeah, there's another point to this that is really important. The Department of Finance puts out its numbers, and they already build in a conservative projection. School Services has shared that with us. We went to a workshop last week on the budget, school budgets, and then from that, after the Department of Finance does that, then we then create our budgets, and we also work with School Services, who gives, they have a calculator, and then their calculator is conservative. And so there's 3 levels of conservative projections that are essentially put into that. But from a small schools perspective, small school district perspective, we have a program, K-12 program, that we are striving to maintain. And so in our assumptions, as we put our projections, our multi-year projections together, which we have to do for the county, we have to show and demonstrate that we can essentially sustain a K-12 school system. And, as Trustee DeWin said, we are deficit budgeting, not deficit spending. And you can see from our healthy ending fund balance that we are, and he has a couple more slides to share with you as well regarding that.
I think one other very quick point to point out is the only reason we can afford to deficit budget is because of our reserves.
We do not want to repeat history again.
So because we have healthy reserves, we can take a little bit of a risk and not lay off staff. But, we have had to lay off staff in the past. It's not something we want to do. But given our healthy reserves, we're able to take some risk with the future.
Are those reserves the 4% reserves that were mentioned in the presentation?
I have a slide that
Okay.
breaks out the reserves.
Okay, can I ask you 2 more questions then before
Sure.
we leave this, which is, do you have this broken out in terms of per pupil spending? That's how the money is calculated by the state, even in LCFF, which I'm not as familiar with.
I can do that.
Yeah.
It's not reflected in these slides.
Okay. Because when the revenues are projected to go down from this year to next, my question is that to reflect enrollment decline, or?
No, that's the change from the one-time basic aid amount to the LCFF funding formula.
Okay.
So the one-time spike in income was strictly from the RDA, Los Angeles Unified settlement with the RDA.
Oh, it was a settlement, it wasn't just.
Well,
the-
they won the case.
The redevelopment agencies around the state were putting money into an account for years and years. And that money was building up. And then when they won the case, that money was distributed on a one-time basis. So it's many, many years of funds all coming in at once. Unfortunately, it's caused other problems, and we're dealing with that.
So that was not money from the Emeryville RDA, but it was a state fund, you're saying,
State
that
fund.
was distributed?
Well, it's Emeryville's
Portion.
portion of a state, but it's many, many years of funds.
It wasn't just the kickback from the due diligence review that we went through and other? Okay. I'd like a little more history on that, because I'm not as familiar with that. I don't know if the rest of the council already knows about that fund, but it's something I wasn't familiar with.
I'll have to revisit that
Okay.
with the county controller, Carol Orth.
Just to get the background. And then my final question is, Member Brinkman asked about the parcel tax and the projections going forward, and you mentioned in 2 years, and I know this only goes through the next 2 years, but I'd just like to understand better what the future, the long-term future of the parcel tax is, or what the plan is around that.
Well, right now, I'm budgeting on a straight line, but there are projects that just aren't complete yet that will hit those tax rolls.
Right.
And we contract with NBS, what's a consultant with regard to parcel tax. I'll see if they can't get that information for me
I
at
guess-
least by second reporting period, interim reporting period, which will also reduce the deficit spending in the out years.
But my other question is, what does the parcel tax need to be renewed, and at what level, and what are the plans around that? Because I don't think it's perpetuity.
The school board hasn't made that decision yet, so we're in the process of gathering information.
Do you know how long this current parcel tax is good for?
2017.
Okay.
But because we are required by the county and state to deliver multi-year projections to demonstrate that we can run a school district for 3 years, we're required to actually begin our parcel tax work earlier than one might normally think. Because otherwise, in that out year of 16, 17, if we were to show that, if we were to go out for the parcel in 16, 17, it would be too late to present that to the county, and then we could be, it would appear as though we were back in, an unhealthy situation. which we
Because
would not
without
want
the
to.
parcel tax, I'm just going back to the very first page, which has the revenues. You said it's the main portion of the 3.7 other local revenue compared with, sorry, it's a little hard to read the numbers.
Yep.
6, so it's more than half of the state funds that we're receiving. It's equal to a third of the total.
Our parcel tax is about $2.4 million, a little more than that.
So this would look very different if the parcel tax was taken out of the revenue.
It's huge.
Oh, absolutely.
And we don't have to do that until 2017.
High school.
Mr. Bonet, what is in 14-15, what's the LCFF state aid projection based on? Is it just a
I don't
flat?
have it off the top of my head.
No, but did you increase it, or?
Yes, it does get increased.
I don't know by how much.
I
Yeah.
I don't have it off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
Yeah, this year, over 12-13, well, the LCFF is an 8-year phase-in to get to a target level of funding, and this year, the state as a whole took a 11.7% step toward that target. And next year, based on where we're at currently with revenues, the state board told our implementation working group that the estimate is 16.4%. So it's a bigger step than the current estimates are than we took this year, which probably is not what assuming is a higher level than the conservative numbers you're
I
being
believe it is,
given
yes.
from school services or elsewhere.
But I think, as has been said, this is a snapshot. The purpose of this agenda item, as I understand it, is to give both parties a chance to see this snapshot. But as we've learned in California, funding for schools is a moving target, and so luckily we have an excellent marksman for that moving target to negotiate the changes.
And I think what we have to really understand, this is the biggest change in 40 years
That's right.
that school financing will be partaking in. There's a lot of uncertainties right now regarding how it will be funded in the future. So at this point in time, all districts within the state have to be very conservative about their projections because, to be honest, no one knows right now what the future looks like. So, I mean, his 14-15 is a very, very conservative number, and hopefully that will increase. But at this point in time, because of the uncertainties of how schools will be funded in the future, it really is best at this time to be at its most conservative as you can.
And I think it's also really important for you to know that, public education in the state's not going away, and that Governor Brown, to his credit, has actually opened the conversation about funding for public education in the state. And I think that we're probably in for a much more positive picture. I mean, this is a very, very positive step that we have. Just him even being able to get the LCFF passed and to begin this conversation. We are 49th in the nation, and we should not be. We should be in the top 10. And this begins the conversation. So I don't want this to end on a bleak note of uncertainty. I think it's a very, very positive step. It's just that because, of this transition, with this transition, we have to present to you as conservative as we can in order to ensure the fiscal health of this school district.
All right, we're past our time for this item, but
That's due to my questions. but I
That's okay.
appreciate the depth of-
I just say that to
I'll
bring
speed
us
it up.
back on focus, okay?
So our multi-year projections, some of the assumptions we've included, step and column increases are in place for our salaries and benefits. We've used a 5% increase for utilities year over year. We have taken out some federal income and expenses out of 14-15 and 15-16 that total about $212,000 because we have a grant that's going away. Again, the projections are conservative, and the expectation is that by the second interim, which is about February 20th, that the deficit amounts will be reduced in the out years. So our ending fund balance, some of the breakdown for that. For 12-13, our revolving cash is $10,000. Our designated for economic uncertainties, which is our 4% requirement by the state, is met out to 15-16. We have $454,000 that we're going to be using for technology replacement. We're doing that currently, so that amount will drop also by second interim. So that's part of some planned deficit spending in fiscal year 13-14.
It also is related to the Smarter Balance Assessment, which is the new assessment system, which is an online test-taking system that we have to get up to speed for as well. So we're taking all of that into account.
We have a reserve for facilities of $2.9 million. We have our general fund unappropriated amount at 1.1, and we have restricted ending balance of $141,000. That's basically some set categorical items that either were deferred or haven't been budgeted yet.
I have a question. So what are the projections that have the reserve facilities line item increasing over the couple of years as you have up there?
So we took some of that one-time dollars from the RDA and put that in that.
I understand for 12-13, but how is it increasing in 13-14, 14-15?
It increases because we receive income from community redevelopment specifically for facilities that weren't associated with the revenue limit. Those dollars are straight-lined, but that's why that increases.
So those dollars will be coming in 13, 14, and 14, 15?
That's correct.
When do they end? Do we know?
I do not. I'm trying to schedule a meeting with County Controller's Office to get more information on that. So our ending fund balance ranges from $5 million and then out to 14, 15 to 4.5. With still maintaining our 4% state requirement and a healthy, unrestricted fund balance. These are the fund balances for all of our other funds besides the general fund. Cafeteria is small because we do make a contribution, but we do keep some cash in there. We have a small deferred maintenance fund. We have a special reserve for retiree benefits, $35,000. The building fund, where all of our bond proceeds are, is $56 million. We have a capital facilities fund, 3.3, which is basically developer fees, and then our bond interest and redemption fund, which is controlled by the county controller's office. We don't touch that fund at all.
Mr. Bonnett, the capital facilities fund, is some of that part of the reserve for our facilities that we'd be looking at as reserves for the new facility?
No. The capital facilities fund, some of that is from MOU, looking MOU 1
And two.
and 2, and developer fees. Majority, I believe, are developer fees.
Can I ask, the capital facilities money, what is the plan to use that?
For ECCL project,
So it'll be folded into the bond money above?
yes. So the overall fiscal health of the district is very, looks very good for the next 3 years, with the idea that the state will be increasing funding for schools for the next 8 years. We do maintain our operations and maintenance budget, and we assume that budget will be reduced when we open the new school. And as of today, in that facility reserve account, we have just about 6 years of capital reserve funds to meet the MOU 3 requirement at this time. That's it. Sorry it took so long.
I just have a couple
Other questions?
of questions. The first, can you talk briefly about what you factored in for the developer fees? Was that straight line too? Because that's,
Actually, that went down considerably
down.
because it does go up and down, and I believe I bumped it down to one of its lowest years.
okay, but we will have more developer fees coming in, so that should help improve some of those numbers.
Yes.
And the other thing is I want to thank all the taxpayers, because if you would have seen the financials 10 years ago compared to today, I mean, it's astounding. We had nothing in any of the categories 10 years ago. And have reserves, I never thought I'd ever see the day that we would actually have $4 or $5 million in reserves. So I mean, but it's, you know, the foundation was set by the taxpayers approving the parcel tax twice. So thank you, taxpayers.
Well, the taxpayer dollars really aren't factored in the reserves, except for the dollars that we're going to use for the replacement of technology. So parcel tax really isn't a big portion except for that replacement of technology account. We're using parcel tax for that and putting those dollars back in the classroom. And just one last comment. Deficit budgeting or deficit spending doesn't lead districts to bankruptcy. What leads districts to bankruptcy is a lack of cash. And with the reserves that we have plenty of cash to operate our district.
Good report.
Okay. All right. Any public comment on the EUSD financials?
Great report.
Thank you, Mr. Bonnett.
It's always great when we have millions in the bank.
That's not the purpose of the school district.
Right, and again, I have to remind people that bottom line is because of this bizarre redevelopment change. We've got these one-time windfalls, so I think it's dangerous to assume that their salaries are based on year-to-year income. If you hire people based on one-time income, it's a good way to get in the kind of trouble this district has gotten into before. But because of that cushion, as the state goes up and down in its funding, it means we can assure our teachers stable employment, because we have the cushion that when it dips down, we don't have to lay a bunch of people off. And so I think that's the real value of the policy that the district has held, of maintaining enough reserves for the volatility in state funding.
I think we should move on to the next item. And
Yeah. I have one other question that will not answer tonight, but I'm just going to raise it so that we
Okay.
have it in mind, which is just around how we compensate our teachers and how our teachers' salaries compare with other districts nearby or similarly sized districts. There aren't very many as small as ours, I know. And what that looks like and how that's projected, because we know that retaining the best teachers is the most important part of any educational program, more important even than the buildings and facilities that we build. So I would love to hear more about that at some point.
I'll just briefly,
Yes.
briefly speak to that, because we recently took a look at that coming out of negotiations. And our teachers are, I believe, in the top 3 total comp in the county with regard to salary and health and welfare benefits.
Great. If you have any further information, that'd be great. Thank you.
We're putting a fact sheet together, and we'll be distributing that to the board, and the board can share that at the next city schools meeting.
Thank you.
All right. The next item is the